Today we're going to be looking at 10 trending wide receivers from the next gen stats. We're going to use these to help you win the waiver wire, win those trades, maybe sell some players off your fantasy team, and on top of that, win your league by looking at those diamonds in the rough. But before we dig in, you need to click that subscribe button right now, because tomorrow we're going to go hot and heavy on the waiver wire. We're going to look at 20 plus wide receivers, 20 plus running backs in different videos, and then Wednesday we're doing again with even more players. Later in the week we're going to use these videos to help you set your lineups. Ric Flair's watching, you don't want to disappoint him. Click that button, stop missing out. Our first wide receiver we're looking at today is Brian Thomas Jr. And he's been going off this season. He went off yesterday and he's got speed to burn. You see that long run right there for the touchdown? Just hitting the afterburners. Fastest run of all of Sunday, of all of week 5. And that being said, he's a primetime wide receiver for the rest of the season and for multiple years. He's breaking out as a rookie. 5 catches, 122 yards, and a touchdown. Went at a great price in drafts this year. Around 7th round per underdog fantasy. Maybe a little bit cheaper in some home league drafts. And now he's going off. He's getting air yards galore every week. He's getting a lot of targets. 9 in week 3, 9 in week 4, 8 in week 5. And we're starting to kick it up in the production standpoint for fantasy football. He's going to be the guy for Jacksonville for quite some time, and he's a guy you need to be looking at paying up for next year and the year after for fantasy football, because he's got the talent to do so. There's good confirmation bias here. Looks good on the field. He's getting the targets, he's getting the work, and he's scoring the fantasy points. Jordan Whittington, if you did not pick him up off waivers last week, you better this week, because the volume is mounting up. 18 targets in the last 2 games. He needs volume though to hit fantasy production because he's got a short ADOT. But we went over all his routes, the game film on live stream Sunday, and he's getting a lot of targets over the middle. He's getting some quick outs. That's from the week prior from looking at the film. And he's just getting that volume from that and soaking it up. He's very reliable, very strong hands. And Stafford likes to look his way, and the targets are starting to rack up. We'll see how those targets look like when Puka and Kupp come back. But he's establishing himself in the offense. He was establishing himself in training camp and in preseason. We were talking about that prior to the season as a guy to pay attention to, a guy to monitor. These wide receivers have a carousel effect right now. All 3 of them. And all 3 of them can get it on any given Sunday. Tutu Atwell did a little bit this week. Demarcus Robinson did a little bit this week. And that's how these wide receivers work in this offense right now. There's a carousel effect where any one of them can get it. It's a gamble, but the fact that he's running a lot of routes, seeing a lot of targets, is very good. Considering he's a late round rookie wide receiver, he's able to climb the depth chart, get some work, carve out a role. That's very encouraging. If anything, he's a player to root for. You root for those underdog players that start doing something. That's what Jordan Whittington is. Brandon Aiyuk, a lot of people left him for dead, but the volume was always there. 5 targets a game in every game but 2 this game, and in week 4 where he saw 10 targets. When you're getting 5+ targets a game consistently, that's a wide receiver to look at, whether the points are coming or not, because it's eventually going to start to hit, and then if it continues, it's eventually going to start to stick. Brandon Aiyuk wasn't dead. It's just a bad run, and that's how football works. And on top of that, you start looking at his lore at draft season this year before the season started when you're drafting these players. He only had 4 wide receiver 1 weeks last year and a slew of wide receiver 2 weeks. He was good points per game. He was steady, but it wasn't like he was a world beater or anything. This is kind of expected when you look at those numbers and forecasted for that there would be volatility. We caught the downward part of that volatility, but we're also hitting some upswings, and we might see some more upswings going forward. Brandon Aiyuk was a guy not to have for dead. He was getting 5 targets a game, and we had a 10 spot there on targets in week 3 against the Rams. There's upside here. It just got to work out. It's just got to hit, and that can happen to any wide receiver in the National Football League. It's not like he's a bad player. The workload was eventually going to allow him to score fantasy points. It did in this matchup. 8 catches, 147 yards, running routes all over the place, and he should be good for the rest of the season. I wouldn't worry about him too much. Keon Coleman, 1 catch, 49 yards, and a touchdown. Khalil Shakir was out in this matchup. We went over all his routes from week 4 on live stream on Sunday morning. I showed them to you guys. We risked the copyright on that. But the thing about this is very similar to what we saw on Sunday and the prior Sunday, is he's going to get a lot of targets around the boundary. He's going to be tight on the coverage. It's going to be contested, and that's going to prevent him from getting more than 5 targets a game consistently. But he is starting to get more work. 4 targets week 4, 5 targets week 5, but Khalil Shakur was out in this matchup. But deep targets downfield, bringing them in randomly, and then bringing splash production is what we're looking at. We're looking at Keon Coleman as more of a volatile player. If you don't know what volatility means, it means that there's going to be a lot of games where he's going to be down, but there's going to be random games where he just spikes up with a lot of fantasy points, and then a lot of games where he's on the down. A lot of times people don't like those types of players, but right now how he projects in the offense, how they like to push it downfield, how he's a boundary player, how he's good in contested spaces, that is something you're going to look at, because sometimes those targets are just going to whiff, whether he's missing due to being contested or it's overthrown because it's deep downfield, or he brings it in, that's a big play, and he brings in 2 of those, it's going to make your week. That is what we're seeing from Keon Coleman. We're also seeing the routes and targets add up, but again, we had some volatility in the offense, but there were moments this year, week 2 and week 3, where you couldn't even see him on the field hardly at all. But again, a player to monitor. Things are starting to look a little better. Not great for fantasy football purposes, but something that's bubbling up. Jalen, Tolbert, Brandon Cooks was out. This was a weird game script against the Pittsburgh Steelers, especially after the rain, getting a lot of work, and we looked at him as a target late in drafts, as a stash, especially in deeper leagues, at the wide receiver spot, because we looked at him as a guy that could see more targets, snaps, routes ran this year, could go to fantasy production, at least be volatile. He's been pretty volatile this year, but he had 3 good games this year so far. 15-pointer, 14-pointer, and a 23-point game so far in the season. We're only 5 games into the season. I think Jalen Tolbert's worth a look and worth a gamble week to week for your lineups once you start getting hit by bye weeks and injuries. If he's on the field, he has potential to get targets, has potential to make that splash play, get those air yards. He was getting a good ADOT for most of the season. That being said, Jalen Tolbert racking up some targets now. Darius Slayton not taking over Malik Neighbors because nobody is. But something to note, if Neighbors gets hurt again, because he's getting all the targets anyways, so there's an increased odds due to that. But if he's back on the field, Darius Slayton has top end speed. I'm not going to say 4.3 speed because that was a long time ago at the combine. Has top end speed, can get downfield, has rapport with Danny Dimes, could earn targets, deep targets, and if he brings in a couple of those, could give you some good production. So when he's back to seeing a fuller workload due to an injury in the offense, Darius Slayton is a guy to look at. Alec Pierce is Will Fuller-esque. You're either going to catch games where he does nothing, or you're going to catch games where he blows up. And in those games where he blows up, he only brings in a couple balls. Reason for that, he's a deep threat. The game script has to get pushed, and that target has to be there. He could get overshot on the target. He could be contested. Those are harder targets to bring in. But those are the targets that are more money for fantasy football when you bring them in, and only got to bring in 1, 2, or 3 of them for you to be valuable for fantasy football. We did it this week. That's what happens. He's a guy to gamble with when you're hurting. He's a good guy to gamble with when you're hurting, especially at this pace he's got right now in the season. A guy to gamble with when you put him on your flex spot and you're hurting at wide receiver, you're hurting at flex, you got injuries and bye weeks, you put this guy in, and you just hope he brings in that deep bomb. If not, he's probably going to score you like 1 to 5 fantasy points. Those 5 fantasy points are only a few points away from those other waiver wire wide receivers that you're picking from, because not a lot of those guys are going to go off either. He's got top end upside week to week. You just don't know what weeks they're going to be. Jalen Coker, this is more for me, but it could be for you. I looked at him as a deep, deep get for Dynasty Fantasy Football for your taxi squad. He's got a lot of talent from Holy Cross, and under the radar wide receiver we're looking at, undrafted. We're watching his depth chart, seeing where he's going to rise up. If he can do that, we got some opportunities here. 4 balls caught, 68 yards. Pay attention to him. If you're in deeper redraft leagues, maybe traditional 12-man leagues, nah, this is more just for me. DeMario Douglas maybe for you, but he'll get good target share from game to game. The game strips for the Patriots are not great for wide receivers, but if you're hurting and you need targets or potential targets due to the game script, DeMario Douglas might be a guy you want to gamble with once these bye weeks start kicking in and you start hurting. Michael Wilson is a wide receiver that you may want to think about off and on throughout the season. He's just always going to be there on the waiver wire. He's going to be picked up. He's going to be casted away, picked up, casted away. The thing about him, when they take away Marvin Harrison Jr., they're going to go to Michael Wilson deep downfield. That's what's going to happen. He's going to rack up some targets. He's always running a good route participation rate. Even last year as a rookie, there's going to be opportunities for him to be successful here and there. The game script's got to hit, but just look at him. He's got a 15-point game, 14-point game, but we're running a lot of snaps from 80 to 90%, some 70% snap shares as well. Michael Wilson's a guy you pay attention to off the waiver wire. You see what happens. You watch how the ball's flowing. You watch the matchup. If it's a tough one, if it's a sticky one, you may want to look his way, or you may want to just gamble with him. Those are 10 trendy wide receivers that we're looking at right now for fantasy football from Next Gen Stats, looking at the charts. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button on the way out. Want to thank you for watching. Catch you on the next video.